Emilio. Come on, come on, come on, come on, come on. You know what they're like. Come on.
The film opens by introducing a woman named Miss Johnson, a former Marine and English literature graduate who is currently looking for work as a teacher. After separating from her husband, Miss Johnson lives alone and tries to start a new chapter in her life. One day, an old friend named Griffith recommends her to apply for a job at Parkmont High School, where Griffith also teaches.
Carla, my friend Luann Johnson's here to outside.
Please, sir, have a seat.
During the interview, Miss Johnson met with the vice principal, Carla, and unexpectedly, Carla immediately offered her a full-time teaching position with a salary of $24,700 per year, even though Miss Johnson had initially only applied for a part-time position. It turned out she would be replacing a teacher who had previously resigned, and this is where Miss Johnson became suspicious when she heard that 3 substitute teachers had already left the class in a short time. Carla avoided further explanation, while Griffith only gave a vague warning for Miss Johnson to be careful, and also implied that the students in her class were notoriously difficult to manage and control. Despite her doubts, Miss Johnson chose to remain positive and decided to give it a try. Miss Johnson's first day of teaching finally arrived, and accompanied by Griffith, she headed to the classroom. But as soon as the classroom door opened, the atmosphere immediately made her silent because the class was very noisy. The students were busy with themselves and no one paid attention to her presence. Calmly, Miss Johnson tried to lead the class and asked what happened to the previous substitute teacher. One of the students loudly replied that they had killed the teacher, which made the whole class laugh loudly. The class leader named Emilio also chimed in and mocked Miss Johnson until the atmosphere became increasingly chaotic and disturbed the other classes around her. At first, Miss Johnson still tried to smile and hold back, but as time went on, she felt uncomfortable with their behavior.
Come on, you know what they're like. Come on.
Finally, Miss Johnson left the class and went to Griffith to ask for an explanation, and Griffith calmly said that the only positions available were for that group of students. At that time, Miss Johnson began to realize that the class was no ordinary class, but rather a place full of challenges and dangers. She began to doubt her own abilities, but Griffith emphasized that the students were actually intelligent, but their academic abilities were far behind. He suggested that Miss Johnson find a way to get them interested in learning, and in the end, feeling challenged and not wanting to give up, Miss Johnson went home with a new strategy.
Hi, you little bastards.
The next day, Miss Johnson arrived at school dressed in a different style, wearing a leather jacket, jeans, and boots, just like when she was a Marine. She wanted to show that she could be as tough and assertive as them, but when class began, the students remained indifferent. To get their attention, Miss Johnson wrote on the board that she was a former Marine and asked if they knew anything about karate. She began demonstrating some basic moves and turned it into a classroom exercise even though it was against school rules. 2 students named Durrell and Raoul seemed interested and began to follow his instructions. And when they were impressed, Miss Johnson told them that they too could become Marines if they tried to get good grades. And in the end, the exercise successfully attracted the attention of the whole class.
Okay, grab his wrist. Okay.
After the atmosphere became more conducive, Miss Johnson switched to English and used several examples of action verbs. She reminded them that in life, everyone is always faced with the choice of giving up or continuing to fight. This statement caused the students to pause and think. Even one student, Kelly, showed enthusiasm and expressed her own understanding of the word's meaning. However, the lesson was abruptly halted when Carla arrived and summoned Miss Johnson to the principal's office.
You could always choose something. Not where I live. Excuse me, Miss Johnson.
Oh, yes.
Would you stop by the principal?
Upon meeting with Principal Grandy, Miss Johnson was immediately reprimanded for teaching karate and choosing a topic deemed inappropriate for the curriculum. He emphasized that Miss Johnson must follow the established guidelines, even if the students might not be interested. The next day, Miss Johnson tried a different approach with all the students. She brought chocolate bars to give as prizes to anyone who could answer her questions correctly, and this method succeeded in making the students more active. She also began teaching poetry and promising special prizes, and if they completed their assignments on time, she would take them on a field trip to an amusement park. When the students asked about the costs, Miss Johnson spontaneously answered that everything would be covered by the school board, and hearing that Emilio immediately accused her of lying, because it was impossible for the school to spend a lot of money just to play on the rides. In the end, his words made the classroom tense again, because some students lost their enthusiasm for learning and the lesson ended in silence. Only Kelly remained in the classroom. Kelly then advised Miss Johnson to try to approach Emilio first because all the students respected his opinion.
If you want to get the class to listen, get Emilio.
Hearing this advice the next day, Miss Johnson gave Emilio a poem by Bob Dylan about the life of a drug dealer, hoping that he would read it and discuss it. But Emilio seemed uninterested and refused to participate. The next day, Miss Johnson witnessed Emilio and Raul getting into a fierce fight at school. She immediately separated them and warned them that if the school found out, they could be punished. Miss Johnson promised to keep it a secret as long as they stopped fighting. The two students agreed, but not long after, Emilio, Raul, Durrell, and Gusmaro got into another fight, resulting in the school suspending them for 3 days. Miss Johnson saw for herself when Raul was taken away by security, and Raul admitted that he only wanted to prove that he wasn't weak. Miss Johnson regretted ever mentioning Raul's body size because her words had unknowingly encouraged Raul to fight. In order to understand her student's circumstances, Miss Johnson began visiting Emilio and tried to talk to him heart to heart. Emilio finally confessed that his life was very difficult, his family was falling apart, and fighting was the only way to vent his emotions. Miss Johnson tried to help, but Emilio felt that no outsider could truly understand his life. After class, Miss Johnson visited Raul's house to meet his parents. Initially, Raul's parents blamed him, but Miss Johnson defended her student, saying that Raul was smart, humorous, and full of potential. Her words made Raul's parents proud and opened their eyes to the good side of their son. After that, Miss Johnson also visited Emilio's house to talk with his family this time. The next day, the students went to Miss Johnson angry because they thought Miss Johnson interfered so that Raul got punished, and they accused her of not understanding their lives. Firmly but calmly, Miss Johnson gave them the choice to stay in her class or leave it, and she also emphasized that there was no coercion, because everyone had the right to choose whether they wanted to keep learning or just give up. When Miss Johnson felt like she couldn't take it anymore, something unexpected happened because Emilio suddenly defended her in class. Emilio said that he really respected Miss Johnson's efforts, who had come to visit the students' homes one by one, even daring to face their parents in order to understand the students' lives more deeply. Emilio's words made the whole class silent, and some students who initially wanted to leave finally decided to stay in the classroom. After that incident, Miss Johnson invited them to discuss life choices and how every decision can determine a person's future. For the first time, Emilio participated in the conversation, indicating that his heart was slowly opening up to learning. As time went by, Emilio's respect for Miss Johnson grew, especially because she genuinely cared about her students. Miss Johnson often visited their home, talked to their families, and tried to help as much as she could. Miss Johnson also kept her promise to take all the students to the amusement park. All the students enjoyed the trip and had fun, as if they had forgotten for a moment about the harshness of school life. However, despite her best efforts, Miss Johnson was reprimanded by Principal Grande for organizing activities outside of the school's standard curriculum without official permission. Miss Johnson calmly explained that she had financed the trip entirely herself, not with school committee funds, but Grande remained unimpressed. Still, there was nothing he could do to stop her. After gaining the trust of her students, Miss Johnson introduced a new challenge called the Dylan Thomas Challenge. In this activity, students were asked to interpret poems by Bob Dylan and Dylan Thomas that discuss life and death, and as a reward, the winner would be invited to dinner with her at a fancy restaurant in the city. Unexpectedly, the students took the challenge seriously, even spending hours in the library researching and seeking a deeper understanding of the meaning of the poem. Unfortunately, their good intentions were misinterpreted by the librarian, who was rude and accused them of making a disturbance. Even so, Miss Johnson remained proud of them. After being judged, the winners of the challenge were Raul, Durrell, and Kelly. However, Kelly could not join the dinner at the luxurious restaurant because she had to work at the supermarket. Finally, Miss Johnson then promised to deliver food for her later that night. During dinner, only Raul was present because the other two students were busy working. The fancy restaurant made Raul feel nervous and uncomfortable, but Miss Johnson patiently calmed him down and engaged him in casual conversation to help him relax. During the conversation, Raul admitted that he was going to drop out of school because he needed money to pay for a jacket he had rented for $200, and he said that the jacket made him feel handsome and more confident. Miss Johnson was shocked to hear that much money for just one outfit, and afterward Raul explained that he rarely owned nice clothes, and the jacket he was wearing made him feel valuable. Touched by this honesty, Miss Johnson offered her help by saying she was willing to lend Raul the money on one condition, that Raul must repay her, not with money, but by graduating from school. At first, Raul did not believe the deal, but eventually he agreed. That same night, Miss Johnson kept her promise to deliver food to Kelly at her workplace. There she learned that Kelly would be transferred to another school due to her pregnancy. Miss Johnson was very disappointed because she believed Kelly had great potential to succeed, especially in English, but Kelly insisted on dropping out of school to care for her unborn child. The next day, Miss Johnson confronted Carla about Kelly and was surprised to learn that the transfer wasn't mandatory, but rather Carla's personal decision. Miss Johnson rushed to Kelly to inform her that she didn't have to transfer schools, but Kelly's reaction was cold and flat. Kelly explained that her boyfriend forced her to transfer schools so they could be closer and start their family. Miss Johnson was heartbroken to hear this, and then invited Kelly to speak privately to share her own dark experience of being trapped in a similar relationship with her ex-husband. Although Kelly listened silently, Miss Johnson knew her words had touched Kelly's heart.
And I had an abortion. Kelly, just don't throw away all you can become.
As time went by, Miss Johnson's teaching methods began to change the students' perspectives on school and life. At first, they were only willing to study if they were given rewards, but over time, Miss Johnson taught them that knowledge itself is the greatest reward. She emphasized that the ability to read, think, and understand is a power that can change lives. She also said that the most powerful weapon in the world is not a gun, but intelligence. But Miss Johnson's struggle was not over yet, because when she visited the Durrells and Lionel's home, their parents rejected her presence and decided to take their children out of school. They believed that Miss Johnson had corrupted their children's minds with unrealistic lessons about poetry and dreams. Their grandmother also added that boys should help earn money rather than pursue dreams of becoming doctors, lawyers, or people who could change the world a little through their kindness. Losing 3 students at once made Miss Johnson feel like a failure. She began to lose her spirit and self-confidence, even though the other students constantly tried to encourage her to stay strong. Just as she was starting to recover, new problems arose when Miss Johnson heard that Emilio was accused of being a drug dealer and stealing someone else's girlfriend, which resulted in Emilio becoming the target of death threats. Angela told Miss Johnson that Emilio carried a gun for self-defense because his girlfriend's ex-boyfriend had sworn to kill him. For his safety, Miss Johnson and Angela asked Emilio to stay at Miss Johnson's house temporarily. During her stay there, Miss Johnson tried to convince Emilio to report to the school and tell them about the threats he had received. She explained that the school could help and send the perpetrator to a juvenile detention center so that Emilio would be safe. However, Emilio refused, saying that reporting the incident would ruin his reputation in his neighborhood. He even said that he would rather die than live forever as a coward. Miss Johnson was frightened to hear this, but she continued to advise him patiently. That night, Emilio left Miss Johnson's house without saying goodbye, and the next morning, Miss Johnson went straight to school to look for Emilio. She asked the principal, Mr. Grandi, if Emilio had come to his office, and Grandi replied flatly that Emilio had indeed come, but he had scolded him and sent him away for entering without knocking. Miss Johnson was shocked to hear how cold the principal's reaction was, and shortly thereafter, Carla arrived with the bad news that Emilio had been found dead, not far from the school. Carla asked Miss Johnson not to tell the other students because she was worried they would react violently. But Miss Johnson refused because she felt that the students had a right to know about their friend's death. When Miss Johnson delivered the bad news to all the students, the classroom fell silent. The students were shocked and deeply saddened, but no one acted out of control as Carla had feared. Miss Johnson felt like a failure as a teacher and decided to resign. She told her students that this would be her last year at the school, and she said she would not be signing a permanent contract because she had other plans. But the students knew the real reason, because they had seen the sadness and loss of enthusiasm in Miss Johnson since the departure of Emilio and several other students. A few days later, Raul came to help Miss Johnson pack. He thanked her for helping him buy a jacket and said that it was the kindest thing anyone had ever done for him. Miss Johnson then advised him to keep studying and working hard until he graduated. Raul admitted that he was unsure whether he could succeed without Miss Johnson's guidance, but she insisted that Raul was smarter than he thought, because she firmly believed that Raul had what it took to succeed. Meanwhile, other students also begged Miss Johnson not to leave because they felt they still needed her guidance to finish school. However, their words were unable to change her decision until finally on her last day at school, something happened when Kelly suddenly returned to class after being persuaded by Raul to come. They hoped that Kelly's arrival would touch the teacher's heart so that she would stay, and sure enough, when Miss Johnson saw all her students standing together, refusing to let her leave, they reminded her of all the poems and lessons she had taught them about choice and determination. They also said that if Miss Johnson gave up now, it would mean she was going against her own teachings. Their words silenced Miss Johnson, and she realized that her students had become strong and courageous individuals. With tears in her eyes, Miss Johnson finally decided to continue teaching and fighting alongside them. The film ends with Miss Johnson standing in front of the class, smiling proudly at her students who have now found their direction in life. And so the film ends. Sometimes life doesn't always give us a good start, but as this film shows, what really matters is not where we start, but who we meet along the way. A teacher like Miss Johnson proves that one caring person can completely change the course of someone's life. She didn't come to be a hero, but her presence brought light to the dark paths of children who had lost hope. This story also teaches us that genuine care can be stronger than rules, and love can be more valuable than punishment. Because in the end, every child only needs one thing to survive: someone who believes they are capable. And sometimes the greatest miracle in life isn't when we are saved, but when someone makes us realize that we are worth saving.